Welcome, everybody, to Warfighters United, a podcast where you hear veteran resources, veteran transitional programs, and veterans' voices from our lips to your ears. My name is Eric Calley. I'm a former U.S. Marine, and I'll be your host for today. If you're a mother, a father, a brother, or a sister who has a family member with PTSD, TBI, or military disabilities, then this podcast could be beneficial to help them transition. Today's podcast is brought to you by SBAM, Small Business Association of Michigan. If you're a small business or you're looking to start a small business, they're here to help you with all your needs. And today I have a very special guest with me, somebody who's close to my heart, my older brother, Brian Calley. He was the former Lieutenant Governor of Michigan. He's now the president of Small Business Association for Michigan. Welcome to the show.
Great to be on the show, and congratulations on launching the podcast.
Yeah, it took a little bit of time to do it, but I'm so glad that I'm here, being able to give veterans voices the attention that they need here in the state of Michigan. And so I want to start out, you're a banker by trade. How did you come up to wanting to be a banker?
Ever since I can remember, even when I was 4 or 5 years old, I remember thinking, someday I'll grow up to be a banker. Said no one ever in the history of the world. No, it's one of those things that just kind of happens. I applied for a job when I was in college and at a bank, and I didn't even get a call back. But then, as fate would have it, another high school student that got the job at the bank just quit on the spot right before the boss was supposed to go on vacation, and so they didn't have a lot of time, and they rifled through who were their rejects from the past, and they came across my application, called me up, and hired me on the spot. And little did I know, 11 years later, I'd still be in banking.
Yeah, I tell you what, in 1999 when I was graduating high school, you helped me get my first job at that same bank, being a courier or whatnot. And then after that, you decided to go into politics, becoming a state rep. I believe it was 2007?
Yeah, I ran in 2006, took office in 2007, but that was after deciding to serve at the local level. When I was in banking, a friend of mine got elected to the county board of commissioners. I didn't even know what a county commissioner was at the time, or what that position entailed. But they needed more financial know-how at the county, and so when she got elected, she said, "Hey, we're about to revamp the county's finances, and being a banker, maybe that's something you might be willing to run for." And so I did. I decided to jump in and did so with both feet. And amazingly, it was an unopposed election. There was nobody running against me in the primary, nobody running against me in the general. And to this day, I've run opposed and I've run unopposed. And I must say I highly recommend unopposed. Much, much easier. But loved my time at the county board. And I did that while alongside being a banker, but the Michigan economy really stunk at that time. It was in the crapper. We didn't know how bad it was going to get at that point, 2003, 4, 5, and 6 when I was on the county board. And I felt confident we were able to straighten out the county government. I thought, well, I'd go straighten out the state government. It was kind of my attitude. So I ran for state rep, and very active election with a lot of opponents in that one, a whole different experience. But it really was because I saw a state that really was not living up to its history, wasn't living up to its reputation of being an economic powerhouse anymore, and wanted to do something about that. So I did. I ran for state rep, left my job in banking to do it. Took quite a chance to do so, but then served during some of Michigan's darkest days, those 2007, 8, 9, and 10. I think about the global financial crisis at that time, the way that the economy tanked in a way that was so much worse than what it had seen before. The rest of the nation went into a recession after 9/11 and then came out of that recession. But Michigan never really came out of the recession. It stayed in the economic doldrums and then fell further in 2008 and 9. And it was just determined to make a difference, but clearly there was nothing going right in the state at the time. And it was, looking back, it was tough work, it's hard work, but rewarding, because sometimes when there's a crisis, it creates a determination for change that otherwise isn't there.
Yeah, Yeah, so, you were talking about 9/11. That's when I joined up into the Marine Corps. And, during your time, probably as a commissioner, I was fighting overseas in Iraq for the first tour and then again in 04 and 05. There's a lot of families out here that have brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers that serve in the military. What was that like for you, just knowing that you had somebody that you loved overseas, fighting America's battle? It
was surreal, and it was a different type of experience than the things that intellectually. I mean, growing up and going through school, about wars and you see images and seen movies and that sort of thing. But I've never known somebody at war before. And, for it to be my little brother was so different. And at the same time, there was, because you were early, right after 9/11 when you joined up, that first wave, like you were right there and reporters were embedded. That was kind of a new thing where you could see action like day by day in such an intimate way. But I remember one of those reporters, I guess, lets you send some images or something. I was at work one day and here an email comes in and it's a picture of you, and in the background are the stubs of that statue they pulled down with Saddam Hussein. I watched it on the news the night before, and then here's a picture of you standing on top of an LAV with that in the background. And it was very, very surreal to think that this kid that I used to play catch with in the backyard was in Iraq fighting a war. But not just that, but literally at the place that was where the epicenter, where the news was happening. There you were, right in the middle of it.
Yeah, a funny story about that. So I got to the Imperial Plaza the day after. My buddy Nick Popovich, Gunny Popovich, actually pulled that statue down with his tank. And so I was with General Conway, and we were going there because he had a lot of people to meet up with, some politicians and everything, and they used that hotel right in front of the statue. And so the day after, I was sitting there, and if anybody doesn't know, they don't have Coca-Cola facilities or pot facilities. So we go into this hotel and they had Cokes for $1 in those old bottled glasses, right? And I look over and I'm like, man, I want one of those. I haven't had pop in I don't even know how long. And so the guy gives me one. I drink about half of them and I look over and he's taking the empty Coke bottles. He's going over to the machine, filling them back up and just putting them back into the fridge. And I said, wow, this Coke bottle has probably been used by 100 people. So I quickly gave it to my buddy and I said, here, take a drink of this so I wouldn't be the only one. Fast forward, you became the lieutenant governor of Michigan. What was it like to be selected to lead the state after those 4 years of being a state rep? You ran for Senate in Isabella County, Ione County, and I believe there was one other, maybe Berry County. What was it like for you to be chosen to run for the lieutenant governor spot here in the state of Michigan?
It's one of those jobs that you can't really set up for. It's one of those things that just happens. It happens because you know a person who becomes governor and have the trust of a person who becomes governor. So I was on a different path. I was running for state senate. I won a primary. It was a four county district. It was right in the center part of the Lower Peninsula. And, I was real excited. That was the course. That was the direction I was going. I won that primary, but right along the way, I had a mutual friend with Rick Snyder and, who would later on become governor, and I liked him. And it's funny thinking back on it now. I thought I was humoring him because I thought he had no chance of winning because nobody had ever heard of him before he started. He never held a political office. And, but we became friends. And we became friends on a basis of something other than politics. It wasn't because he thought that I was a powerhouse or I thought he was a powerhouse. We just got along and developed a trusting relationship. I won my primary and he went on to win his primary after the famed One Tough Nerd ad and kind of starting a new brand, and it just really caught on. It was a pretty amazing experience, and he called me up. I'll never forget being in the St. John's Mint Festival ice cream mint chocolate chip ice cream booth that the Chamber of Commerce puts on, and he called me. I had one of those old BlackBerry phones. Those things were built like a tank, had actual keyboards on them, and I had his name programmed in there. And he called up, and I was kind of showing off all the other people in the booth. I was like, "Oh, look who's calling me! The guy who's about to get elected governor." and then I picked up, and he said, and so everybody's watching me as I'm talking to him, and he says, "Brian, you can't share this with anybody, but I wondered if you were maybe interested in being considered for lieutenant governor." And so I had to excuse myself. All right, everybody who's watching this, I know I tried to draw attention to this call, but if you excuse me a moment, I acted like I thought about it for a day. I decided on the spot, but told him the next day. And we joined together. I vacated that Senate primary win, and we ran together and won by a landslide. It was an 18-point win, which in Michigan is almost unheard of to win that amount. But it was because the economy had fallen so bad. We were 50 out of 50 on everything, virtually everything. And so it was an important time and an exciting time because there were a group of change agents that had the guts to lead and to make big things happen. So it felt like a leap of faith at the time, but it seems so natural today. Everything worked out the way it did, the way it was supposed to.
Yeah, so, while you were lieutenant governor, there was a lot of veteran issues that got brought to the forefront over those 8 years. When you're talking the DNR, you have all these transitional, guys getting in and out of the military services, and they come back home. And so with the DNR, you actually made it so where 100% veterans could get their free hunting tags. They can get their free fishing license. They can get their trapping tags. What was behind the reasoning of that?
Really an appreciation for the service and the history. Michigan has such a storied history going all the way back to the Civil War in making extraordinary contributions to America's war efforts. And that just deserves continuous thanks. It's, I think even though it was received really well, we thought of it as a very small thing, a small gesture to say to people 100% disabled veterans ought to be able to hunt and fish and trap for free. I mean, that it's the least that we could do. So part of it is the actual thing. The bill passes and it creates an opportunity without a financial barrier or hardship. But I think just as important as the statement, the gesture that you guys are appreciated. I mean, it's a big deal. That service is a big deal, and we should never pass up an opportunity to prove it.
Well, I tell you what, too. What it also does is you have these 100% veterans out there that maybe not leave the house. They don't go out in public. They don't go out in big crowds. They have PTSD and they don't get out very much. Well, that provides an added opportunity for them to get out in nature, for them to be at one with Michigan's culture, Michigan's forestry, go out and be able to relax, do some fly fishing, do some fishing in any matter, or put a gun in your hands again, go out and shoot a deer for your family to have food. I tell you what, that is probably one of the best things that Michigan has done in a long time. Along with, if you're a 100% veteran, you also get your property tax. You have no property tax. What was behind that?
Yeah, that financially, of course, is a much bigger deal. And it was more of a push or more of an effort to get that through, partly because I think, local governments are always acting like they're strapped for cash. So, there was some opposition to getting it passed, but this was something that we looked at as more than a gesture of appreciation, but something that just makes it possible for veterans who are disabled to maintain their homes. The ability to work and earn a living connected to service disabilities. It's for some people that's just an insurmountable barrier. And to think that somebody could own a home, but because of property taxes they could lose that home. There's no there's no need for that, and it's just wrong. And that was really the driving force behind that bill passing, was that regardless of all the other factors that, government, no matter how much money government has, they always feel like they need more. And it was just the right thing to do, to say, you're going to have to do without getting payments from 100% veterans, because that is the type of income that those veterans are living on. It's not enough. And so if you can at least remove the property tax barrier, remove the threat of loss of home because of non-payment of taxes, it's, again, the least that could be done. The other thing that happened during those times that, once we really got into it, we were kind of surprised to learn, was that veteran utilization of benefits, including like, the ability to go to college, and have that paid for, and all the other veteran programs, utilization in Michigan was literally last in America. It was, for whatever reason, veteran benefits were just utilized less here than every other place. But not only were we behind every other state, we were behind the other territories. We were behind American Samoa and Puerto Rico. And so there was a reorganization that happened within the State Department for Veterans that was just aimed at making vets aware of what is available, and then helping guide through the process of utilization. And there was some pretty good progress that was made. I've been out of office now for 6 years, so I don't have the inside scoop of where Michigan stands or how well any of that has been kept up, but it was a big deal to say that, there are benefits that are on the table, and oftentimes go unused because people don't know about it, or just the bureaucratic system to access them is just too hard to get through, given all the other priorities people have in life.
And with that, we're going to take a quick commercial break here from our sponsors, and we'll be right back.
Running a small business is tough, but you don't have to do it alone. The Small Business Association of Michigan provides tools, connections, and advocacy to help you succeed. Join thousands of fellow entrepreneurs at SBAM.org.
Welcome back. So I'm sitting here with former Lieutenant Governor Brian Calley and President of Small Business Association, my older brother, and we're going to talk about another thing. Back in 2014, 2015, I was flying down to Florida with my service dog, and for those of us who have service dogs, they're like a piece of medical equipment. And I'm flying down, and I get to Detroit, and I go to board the plane, and they're not going to give me adequate space for my dog. I go to the front gate, they say, oh, you got to ask for that in the back gate. I get to the back gate, and they're completely rude to me. U.S. Airways was. And the guy was like, well, if they didn't give you a spot in the beginning, you're not going to get a spot here. And so I had to call for a manager, and the manager came over, and during that time, the plane had got in, and then one of the stewardess came out and was standing there, and of course, the manager starts providing adequate space for my service dog, which federally, that's something they have to do. And, they have to leave a seat open next to you so that dog has adequate space. Well, she's doing that. She berates the person that I was talking to first, and the stewardess sees it. So fast forward, we get on the plane, and the plane's taking off, and granted, I've only flown with this dog a handful of times. And so when the plane started taking off, the dog sat in that chair next to me, and I did not know that was federally illegal. And so this stewardess that, heard the other guy, his friend, getting berated, came over, and he starts berating me in front of everybody about my service dog, how it has to be on the floor. So I put my dog on the floor immediately, and the guy keeps berating me. And I look up to the guy, and I say, sir, my dog is on the floor. What more can I do? And he starts telling me, I said, I've done what you asked. Can you please just leave me alone? He keeps berating me. And so, the guy walks away, and he, we're flying through, and we go to land, and as, the noises start happening, my dog puts her paws up on that seat. The same guy comes back to me and starts berating me again. So I put my dog on the floor, and I'm petting my dog, and he just keeps berating me. By this time, passengers behind me are starting to say something to the stewardess. Like, hey, leave the veteran alone. His dog is on the floor. He's not doing anything. And he starts telling those people, you don't tell me what to do. And I mean, it was totally embarrassing. And I mean, everybody could see it. And so when I get off the plane, to my luck, over 15 passengers are standing there to make a complaint about this stewardess. So they call a manager over, and the manager comes, and, these people are telling the story just like I just told everybody else. And, I had to catch another plane to go down to Florida because it was kind of like a graduation party for everybody who graduated in that 6 months with service dogs. And so that manager, they took that flight crew off the line, and I'm pretty sure they got reprimanded. I'm not sure. But then they drove me over to my plane, and in front of 40 people, we drive up in this little go-kart. I get off the plane, or I get off the go-kart, and, the manager starts telling in front of everybody what just happened. And I said, man, I'm right here in the limelight. That's and it just made me feel so uncomfortable, And so that plane also didn't have adequate space, so they had to redo that again. And finally I get down to Florida. I spend 3 or 4 days at Guardian Angels Medical Service Dogs, and I go to get back on the plane. And this is where I realized it was just not a me problem. This was a problem because federal airlines, they have autonomy when it comes to state laws or anything like that. And they didn't have adequate space for my Doberman Pinscher, which, is a bigger dog. And so finally they put me on a different plane that had space. I had to wait a few hours, and I started noticing that this was a huge problem throughout the airline industry. And so I get back to Michigan finally, and luckily the Lansing State Journal did a huge story on it, and next thing you know, it blows up across the nation. On every single paper across the nation, veteran mistreated by U.S. Airways. And, from that, you were lieutenant governor, and, of course we had talked about it, and next thing you know, now Congressman Tom Barrett and some others and you stood up and said maybe we could create state law. Tell me a little bit about that process of making state law for service dogs.
Yeah, there's there is some federal law, but there's a really big problem in enforcing federal law when something's not codified at the state level. So like with the Americans with Disabilities Act, for example, is one that, there are certain protections there. But if you want to enforce that, it really takes in most cases, you're going through a federal agency for it. And it's just not very accessible. There's a couple of things by passing in state law the requirements for accommodations for service animals that elevate it. First is to make people aware. A lot of times there's not good training in places like that. I'm sure that U.S. Airways, in that case, that those employees didn't know much about what the law required. Hopefully it was ignorance as opposed to animosity. So part of it is raising awareness by just the process of making laws, but also it gives a local avenue for enforcement. So if you have something that is in state law, then you can have law enforcement in Michigan take a complaint and investigate and take action. It's so much more accessible than trying to go through the U.S. Department of Justice or some other federal agency to file a complaint or get something done. And I think that's why these sorts of things can often go unaddressed so often, is because something like that happens, like somebody's embarrassed and they just kind of go away. Most people don't have the type of gumption that you have to follow through and make sure that, if you're having this issue, then other people like you are having that issue. And that's really the basis of citizen representation. I think that's when government is working the best, is when it's based on the real experiences of citizens that is brought to bear through the process of making laws to solve problems. It was a big deal. And so even though it was, something that I think generally was quite popular when it passed, in terms of, it made sense to people. Once the problem was expressed, the process was underway, At that time, Tom Barrett was in the state legislature and serving in the Army National Guard himself, had made a real priority on veteran issues, but he took it up, and now he's been rewarded by constituents to be a member of Congress, and what a great outcome for him. But ever since I've known him, he's really made issues like this a priority, and it was really cool. By the way, I remember when that bill was signed, that there were service animals people with service animals including you, in the press auditorium, and the governor's up there signing the bill, and here are service animals around him. It was one of the coolest experiences to come away with, because normally those are pretty stuffy occasions, and there's nothing like a dog to lighten the mood.
Yeah, so those of you with service dogs, the state of Michigan has a voluntary registry. You can submit to the Department of Civil Rights and what the dog's task is, as well as a sign from a medical profession. But with that law, we made a Michigan State service dog patch. You can get that patch for free. All you have to do is contact the Department of Civil Rights for the state of Michigan, tell them that you have a service dog, provide that information they require. And what's really cool is I think the civil department keeps record of all these dog places that are training service dogs to make sure they're credible. And so when the public sees that patch, and when that restaurant sees that patch, the hotel sees that patch, they know they don't have any right to question, because the state of Michigan has already done it for them. So I recommend, if you have a service dog, you go out and get that patch. That patch will be hugely beneficial in just recognizing that there should be no reason any facility who knows what that patch is should ever even question you. Thanks, Brian, for all you've done for the state of Michigan and our veterans. Stay tuned. Next week, we'll have the 22 Project, and we'll be focusing on post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury.